Another new year. Another list of things that I didn't quite accomplish in that past year. And yet, when reflecting back on this past year of writing and publishing, I did achieve so many things that maybe weren't even on my list. And that's what the beginning of a new year is like for writers. And that's what this episode of the Stark Reflections podcast is all about.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and Happy New Year. Happy 2020. I'm recording this on January 2nd, 2020, and this is going to be for the podcast that is officially released on Friday, January 3rd, 2020. This is going to be a solo episode, and in it I'm going to be reviewing the writing and publishing goals that I had set for myself and talked about on the first episode from January 2019. So I'm going to look at those 2019 writing and publishing goals. I'm going to take a look at how I did with them, because I think it's always important to take a look at things that I said I would do and see what I actually ended up doing. They don't always line up. They don't always match. But it's okay, because as I get into it, you'll see that I did some other things that some of it was related, some of it was completely came out of the blue and I didn't even know was going to happen. And that's always an important thing when you're planning on things in the new year. You also have to plan for the unexpected or the unplanned, or however you're going to think about those things. And I'm also going to be sharing the percentages of my indie or self-published income in terms of ebook, print, and audio. I'm going to look at the percentages of each. I'm going to look at the percentages from each retailer, library, market, etc. I did not get through all of the income that I made in completion as a writer, and I'm only looked at my publishing stuff. I basically spent about 6 hours going through sales reports from the various platforms. I think I got most of them, probably got about 95% of them done. And then even some of the December stuff, the final numbers aren't in yet, but I have a rough estimate. So that can give me an idea of how did I do with ebook sales, with audiobook sales, with print book sales, only on the independently published stuff that I did, which is about half of what I do in the publishing efforts that I make in a year. But it gives me a good idea in terms of my indie publishing behavior and activities on how I did and where the money's actually coming from. And a lot of authors this time of year are very dependent upon Amazon when they look back at the previous year. And I've always wanted to diversify my income. And I'm quite pleased that I do have a relatively diverse income. Amazon is still a huge chunk, but not a majority of my income. And that's really important to me, that I don't rely on any single source. But I'll get into that. Before we jump into a very brief personal update, just going to do a quick ad read for this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices. In December 2019, Findaway Voices announced 2 new distribution partners, Papaya FM and Anyplay. Anyplay is a new audiobook retailer, and based in Hong Kong, Papaya FM will be providing users in the US and beyond with unlimited access to audiobooks for a fixed monthly price. Now, if you're already distributing an audiobook with Findaway Voices, you'll find both partners are already on your audiobooks distribution selection page. There's nothing you need to do. Findaway Voices will start sending your audiobook to these new partners as soon as their integrations go live. This is just another benefit of distributing your books with Findaway Voices, and as this episode is about, I do talk about the diversification of income that I make, and I break it down into the various different audio platforms where I earned audiobook income for 2019, and I'm pleased to say that several of the places that I made the most money from audiobooks are not the regular players that you might suspect are the big ones. The big ones do appear there, but they're not as big as you might suspect. And that's one of the benefits of distributing with a place like Findaway Voices, where your book is getting into these new channels. Like, who knows what AnyPlay and what Papaya FM are going to bring to me, but I'm looking forward to that. And you can find out how you can take advantage of Findaway Voices over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. In terms of a personal update, the flu I talked about in last episode, in episode 111, is finally dissipating. I was on my back for almost 3 full days, completely out of it. Not a good place to be, which kind of set me back because I had been planning on starting the audio recording of an author's guide to working with libraries and bookstores, but my voice still isn't back to 100%, so I'm hoping that I can get started on that next week. I didn't get a lot done in terms of writing, other than a couple projects I'm going to be talking about later on. And mostly it was just kind of trying to get back into shape, trying to get back into proper health so that I can kick off this new year properly. So not much to offer in terms of personal updates, but I'm now going to get to some comments and emails received. For episode 109, which was 12 takeaways from CAPS Convention 2019, Amy Tasakata left a comment on that episode, and Amy said, "Another awesome podcast, Mark. Love how you were able to pull information from a non-writing related conference into takeaways for us." Thank you so much, Amy. I think it's important for us to always take a look at things going on in other industries and parallel industries, and being able to apply those learnings to your writing business, perhaps, or to the way that you handle and think about your audience, for example. So at CAPS, a lot of it is thinking about the audience as a speaker, but that's the same sort of thing. We can apply those things to our audience as writers. So thanks so much, Amy. I plan on doing more of that. And I do know that there was a comment left on a previous episode from Chad Boyer, who had said he'd asked me to outline some of the conferences that I had attended or that I think would be worthwhile for attending. And I haven't, Chad, my apologies, I haven't had a chance to kind of list and outline the pros and cons, at least of the ones that I'm familiar with, because obviously I can't talk about the ones I'm not familiar with. If I try to talk about the ones I'm not familiar with, and maybe not such, shouldn't listen to me about those ones, because how would I know? But I will share based on the ones that I go to, and some of the other ones that maybe I don't go to anymore, but I'm familiar with because friends of mine go to them and they've shared information about them. So that'll be coming up in a future episode. And again, thanks for those comments. Also via Twitter, Chris Racknor asked a question via Twitter recently about Canadian options for ebook publishing. And thanks for reaching out, Chris. There aren't any actual Canadian publishing solutions for ebooks that I would be able to recommend, other than using Kobo Writing Life, for example, for direct publishing to Kobo, because that is Canadian. But all of the major ebook distribution platforms, so Draft to Digital, Smashwords, for example, they're all US-based companies. StreetLib and Publish Drive are European companies. There is no Canadian aggregator out there. But that's okay. At least as Canadians, we do have access to amazing companies from around the world. Now, just be aware, if you're a Canadian author publishing to US companies, for example, going direct to Amazon via Kindle Direct Publishing, or using Ingram Spark for your print books, etc., or using Draft to Digital or Smashwords or one of those other companies, to make sure that you enter your tax information. There's a tax survey form that you have to fill out, and you have to fill it out every couple years again, sort of you have to refresh it. You have to declare yourself as a Canadian citizen, which is part of a treaty company, which actually makes you exempt from the 30% withholding tax. Otherwise, if you don't make yourself exempt as a Canadian, as a treaty country from the US, from that 30% withholding tax, like me in the early days, for every $100 you get from an American company like Amazon, they're only going to give you 70. They're going to withhold 30% of that. So for every $100 I was making in the early days, I was only getting $70 of that, 70% of that. And that changed probably in the last 2 or 3 years, I believe. You can actually put in your social insurance number, which is kind of like you used to need to try to get an ITIN. And I had applied for ITINs for years and wasn't able to get them. But as a Canadian citizen, so for you Canadians listening to this podcast, make sure that, with Amazon, with Drafted Digital, with Smashwords, with any of those American companies, Ingram Spark, etc., make sure you declare your Canadian status as a treaty country with your social insurance number so that you do not have the 30% withholding tax. So thanks for asking that question on Twitter, Chris. I think it's important for me to reiterate here in the show, just so that listeners can benefit from that understanding. And finally, an email from Barry Fortson actually came in, and it was the very first email I had actually looked at on the early morning of January 1st, 2020. And Barry said, I wanted to leave some feedback. I've been a listener to your Stark Reflections show and have enjoyed it very much in 2019. Barry mentioned the disruption in the middle of the year, and he thought I had stopped doing shows. But fortunately, he went back into the app, and he uses RSS radio. And he had noticed that the show had been reposted, so he was able to catch up. And thanks for mentioning that in the email, Barry. I don't know what happened. I'm still trying to figure out the issues I had. I think it was related to when I had to change the categories for Apple in the midsummer, and it just messed up my entire feed. I had to redo my entire RSS feed, and I it's difficult because you guys listening to the show, obviously you figured it out, or you joined after that. There was no way for me to go back and send something in the old feed that said, hey, I'm still around. You just got to kind of refresh your feed. So, again, I probably lost a bunch of listeners there, but thanks for sticking it out, Barry. And thank you, listener, for sticking it out. Barry also said, as a listener to many podcasts on book publishing, I would say that you have one of the best, if not the best shows, which is driven by your unique personality, but also by the great variety of guests and viewpoints, which I do not hear about anywhere else. Barry, thank you so much. That means so much. Obviously, my head is swollen up now. I can't walk out of the door because it's so big. I'm going to be like banging into the walls, even more so as a 6'3" tall person banging my head on ceilings. But I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm glad that my unique personality... what was that a line Del Griffith says in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? What's unique? Is that Latin for asshole? But no, thanks, Barry. I appreciate that. But I'm glad you like the unique personality of the show and the perspective that I bring. And I'm glad you like the guests and the viewpoints, because I do intend on bringing in more guests and other wonderful viewpoints for the show that I think are going to be valuable. And what I do try to do is I do try to bring in guests that you may not hear on some of the other writing podcasts. And like Amy had said, related to episode 109, I want to try and bring in different perspectives from outside our industry and how we can learn more about ourselves as writers and as publishing professionals from other professions. I think that's really, really important. So thanks for calling that out, Barry. I really appreciate that. And thanks for listening to the show. Now, speaking of additional guests and people that are going to be on the show, I have scheduled for January 6th, Monday, January 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're looking to start the year with takeaways on how to have a productive 2020 in your own writing and publishing career, then this webinar is for you. I'm going to be interviewing 4 different hugely successful authors that I respect and admire: M. Jane Collette, Tracy Cooper Posey, Andrea Pearson, and Talina Winters. They all have amazing different perspectives on productivity. And so it's a panel discussion that I'm going to moderate. We're going to be live on Monday, January 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be asking them questions about productivity so that I can learn and I can plan for a better 2020. And I'll be recording that, of course, which will be coming up in a future episode of the podcast. So you'll get the video webinar, obviously, which I'll be able to record and replay that and post that with the show notes. But it'll also be in an upcoming episode of the podcast. So again, some of the amazing voices and talents. Now, Andrea and Talina were already guests on previous episodes, but I haven't had Jane or Tracy on. So I'm really excited to have these 4 amazing women that I get to learn from. And as I'm learning, you get to learn from as well. So that'll be in a forthcoming episode of the podcast. And finally, before we get to the main content for this episode, I wanted to thank all patrons of the podcast for your patronage and for your support of the podcast for as little as $1 $3 or $5 a month, you can get access to additional audio and other content that I make available over at patreon.com/starkreflections. And I wanted to welcome new patron, Lindsay Baroker. Lindsay, who has been a guest on the show, and I have been fortunate enough to be guests on several of her different podcasts over the year. Lindsay, thank you so much, and welcome to the small but powerful family of patrons who are supporting the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. Lindsay, I hope you had a chance to take advantage of some of the amazing backlist content that is available for all patrons of the show. The patron support does help with the additional time that I put into making sure that I put out an episode every single week. And the episodes will always be free, will always be available for free to anyone who wants to listen to them. And of course, in thanking my patrons, I create additional content, reflections on other podcasts, and other content available only to patrons, just to thank them for their patronage and support. But that's enough introductory matter. Let's get right into the main content for this episode. Okay, so back in the very first episode of 2019, I laid out some of the goals I had created for myself for 2019, and I wrote down 9 goals, and they were: number 1, publish the audiobook for 7 P's of Publishing Success. Number 2, publish the audiobook for Killing It on Kobo. 3, finish writing and publish the ebook, print, and audio for Indie Publishing Insider Secrets. Number 4, publish the audiobook for A Canadian Werewolf in New York. 5, publish the audiobook for iDeath. 6, publish the audiobook for One Hand Screaming, a short story collection. 7, write and release Screaming Skulls and Other Haunted Objects in ebook, print, and audio. 8, finish the first draft of Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, which is the sequel to A Canadian Werewolf in New York. And 9, book new speaking gigs. Ideally, another keynote either in the last half of 2019 or the first half of 2020. And so, here's what I actually achieved. Well, from the list of the 9 things I just read, I achieved only one of them. Of all the 9 things I thought I would get done, I only got one of them done. I published the audiobook for the 7 P's of Publishing Success, which had originally been published in ebook in 2018, and I self-narrated that one. But on the surface, when I look at it, I had 9 things listed, and I only got one of the 9 things done. I could beat myself up about that, or I could take a look then at what did I actually get up to? What did I get finished? What did I complete in 2019? So, number 1, I got the audiobook for the 7 P's of Publishing Success completed. Yay! Number 2, Fiction River Feel the Love, which is an anthology I edited, came out in February of 2019. So most of the work I had done in 2018, but hey, I'll take that as a win. I had a book with my name on the cover come out. And 3, I got the audiobook for Bumps in the Night, narrated by Chris Humphreys. CC Humphreys was a guest on an earlier episode of this show, and so I got that done, which is exciting. I also got the print version done for Bumps in the Night. Now, Bumps in the Night at one point in time on Amazon in the UK was my best-selling title. This is probably back in 2014, so this is like a digital chapbook. But hey, I got the print version of it done. That's an accomplishment. Number 5, I got the audiobook for This Time Around done, and that was narrated by my friend Scott Overton. Now, that is the 10,000-word short story that became the novel, A Canadian Werewolf in New York. And so even though I didn't get the audio for A Canadian Werewolf in New York done, still some hang-ups with the narrator. I think I'm giving up on the narrator I'd had, and I'm looking at how I can actually get the full Canadian Werewolf book done. Number 6, I got the audiobook for Snowman Shivers done. It was a self-narrated audiobook. I also got the print version for Snowman Shivers done. Now, Snowman Shivers was a free ebook, two-story collection themed ebook. I'd never had the audiobook done. I'd never did the print version, so I'd expanded that for both the audiobook and for the print, so I'm pretty excited about that. Number 8, Fiction River Superstitious came out in October of 2019, and hey, I'm pretty pleased about that. I mean, some of the work was done in 2019, some of the work was done in 2018, so I'm pretty pumped about that. And then number 9, although I never got back into finishing the first draft of Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, I did write a novella in that same universe. So Stowaway which is about 23,000 words. Now, it takes place a few months after the events in the Canadian Werewolf in New York, and takes place just prior to the events in Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. Now, Stowaway was written last year and was published in late 2019 in the anthology Amazing Monster Tales 2 Monster Road Trip. And I'm pretty pumped and excited about that. So it was a full-length novella in that universe, which is basically going to be book 1.5, which I'm pretty pumped about. Number 10, book 3 in my Stark Publishing Solutions series, An Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores. And I owe the writing and publication of that to you, the listeners of this podcast, for asking great questions that turned into episodes that I recorded, which in turn became the initial outline for the content that turned into what I thought was going to be a short book, but is actually a relatively longer book. And again, even though I didn't get the Indie Publishing Insider Secrets book done, I got that one done, book 3. So I did get a book done in the Stark Publishing Solutions series. So it's almost like I knocked off one of the other ones on my initial list. 11, I submitted a reprint story to the anthology Curse Collectibles, which was raising money for the Don Hodges Scholarship Fund for Superstars Writing Seminar. And I got to work with an amazing editor on that and refine this story, which was amazing. Probably the best version of that same reprint story that's ever appeared anywhere. And 12, completely unexpected, had not planned on it. And I did talk about this in a previous episode, but I published a voice map custom audio walking ghost tour of downtown Hamilton. That was a significant amount of writing and re-research and editing and audio, etc. And it's a completely new digital audio format of income earning opportunity. Now, I also participated in a couple of collaborative projects that are going to be launched in January 2020. Now, I wrote a new short story for an anthology. I wrote that in 2019, and that anthology is coming out in early 2020. And I submitted another original story that's never been published to a digital bundle that's going to be launched in a week or two, which I'll be probably talking about on this podcast. And I crafted a custom 40,000 word ebook as an exclusive for a story bundle that Dean Wesley Smith had invited me into. And that's something that I'm going to be revisiting and re-releasing likely in the next couple of months. Now, also in late 2019, I've been working on co-authoring another book about writing and publishing with a listener to this podcast, but I'm not going to talk about that here. That's going to be announced in a future episode, and that's going to be released in early 2019. So no, of the 9 things I wanted to get done on the list, I got one of them done, but I did get 12 other things done and began the work that a lot of the work that I did in 2019 is probably going to show up in 2020. So kind of like those Fiction River anthologies that I was working on. The work done last year is going to come out this year, that sort of thing. And so it's important not just to look at the things that I got done, but look at the work that I did that's going to be invested into future projects. So with that in mind, here are some of the goals that I've outlined for myself for 2020. Number 1, the audiobook for An Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores. That's important to me to get done. I got the ebook, I got the print book done in 2019. 2020, I want to get the audiobook done. I also want to get the audiobook done for Killing It on Kobo. That's a harder one to do because there's images and things like that. But some of the work I did with An Author's Guide to Working with Libraries and Bookstores has helped me figure out how to properly do the audiobook for Killing It on Kobo. So I want to work on that as well and get audiobooks for all 3 books in that series out, which is exciting. Number 3, I want to get the audiobook done for A Canadian Werewolf in New York. So again, that's a repeat from last year. And then number 4, I want to get the audiobook done for Stowaway, which is that novella I talked about, book 1.5 in the Canadian Werewolf universe. Number 5, I want to get the ebook edition for Stowaway. Number 6, I want to get the print edition out for Stowaway. Yes, I'm breaking these down into smaller goals because I think it's important. All the different formats that you get out of a book are important, so I want to outline them separately. Now, number 7, in that same universe, I want to finish Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, which is book 2. I've actually done a lot of thinking about this book, and even in some of the stuff that I wrote for Stowaway, it made me go back and think about some ideas that I can implant in Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. And number 8, I want to get the audiobook done for I, Death. Number 9, I want to get the audiobook done for One Hand Screaming. Number 10, this is a project that we started last year but haven't finished. Shayna Krishnasamy and I wrote Macabre Montreal, but we have a mini, like an ebook only, to Macabre from Montreal, which is stuff that our editor made us cut from Macabre Montreal, and plan on releasing that in 2020. 11, I do want to continue to work on Screaming Skulls and Other Haunted Objects. Again, similar non-fiction paranormal ghost book. Number 12, I want to actually finish writing Weird Waterloo. And I did find a publisher to pitch it to last summer. So I'm going to be pitching it to a new publisher because it looks like Dundurn isn't going to bite on that one, which is kind of sad. Oh, well, too bad. Another publisher will get that opportunity. Number 13, other non-fiction paranormal ghost story project, which I'm not going to share the details about here yet, but I do have something that I'm working on. I can't talk about. Number 14, a new short story collection, Nocturnal Saves, related to something that I did, which was an exclusive for a story bundle. I have to rework that. And that's going to be short story collection that will be, I guess I could break it down, but it's going to be ebook, it's going to be print, and I'll see if I can get the audiobook done for that one as well. And number 15, an exclusive audio project that I've kind of had on my whiteboard that I plan on trying to release in 2020. And then number 16 is I'm going to actually examine the viability of the Indie Publishing Insider Secrets books. And I want to see how and where it fits in with the first 3 Stark Publishing Solutions series books. And that might just be another very specific topic, which ends up being rolled out in a separate book that I'm not even aware I'm going to write. Kind of like that author's guide to working with libraries and bookstores. I will probably do another book in that series. Will it be Indie Publishing Insider Secrets, or will it be something more specific? So those are the 16 goals that I've set for myself for 2020. I suppose I can break a couple of them into up to 20 goals because some of them are smaller goals within, like the 3 different versions. That would be 3 different goals rather than just one. But anyways, those are the looks at the goals from 2019 and how I did, as well as my goals for 2020. The last thing to reflect on here when I think about those goals is it's important to look at what I did, what I didn't get done. Why didn't I get this done? Some of the things were out of my hands. Some of the things were in my hands. Some of the things, perspectives changed or priorities shifted, or my ability to get one thing done was not there, but I found a new ability to get something else done. I had editors requesting stories for me from projects, and so I invested in that. Other things that came up, like voice maps. Yeah, when the voice map thing came up, I kind of put aside all other writing projects, and I focused on that for a while. And it's okay to be able to pivot and shift in the middle of those goals. And I know that these 16 goals that I outlined for 2020, I know I'm not going to get them all done, and that's okay. I'm going to get some of them done, and I'm going to readapt some of the other ones. And maybe you're doing the same thing when you're looking at your own goals and the things that you thought you would achieve for 2019 and what you plan on achieving for 2020. And I hope it's okay for me to suggest that it's all right to adapt. It's all right to modify those plans, so long as you're actually making forward progress. And so even though I didn't get those things done that I thought I was going to get done, I believe I did make some progress. I made progress on new formats of books that I did not have before, so I'm pretty pleased with that. And we're going to get into how that increased some of the percentages that I earned this year, as well as projects I had never even anticipated, and being open to those new opportunities that are going to come your way that you're not even aware of right now. So that's it for goals. Let's jump over now to a look at the percentages of my income from indie author projects in 2019. Okay, here's a look at the indie publishing income percentages for 2019. Now, I did not include my non-indie or my traditional or even my mixed revenue sources. This is just pure indie income. So, looking at Kindle Direct Publishing and Kobo Writing Life and Draft to Digital and Smashwords, and looking at Ingram Spark, and looking at Findaway Voices, looking at the various places where I made indie publishing income. And so for my indie publishing income, in terms of the 3 formats of ebook, print, and audio, here's the breakdown. Ebooks made up 81.51% of that income. Print made up 13.3%. 5.35% of that income. And audio made up 5.15% of that income. So that's an interesting thing to look at. Now, print is probably a little bit larger than most other indie authors. Most other indie authors, I would suspect that their print is anywhere from 5 to 10%. Mine's probably a little bit larger because I did a lot of in-person events. So let's take a look specifically at print, shall we? Now, just because print is has the least number of variables within it. So within print, so I broke that down into sort of 5 different areas where I made print income. So here they are in order of magnitude. Okay, so the biggest income source for print was in-person events, where I was actually selling my books directly in person, usually for cash or using Square, which I used to take credit. And that was 64.16% of my print income came from in-person events. The next highest print income for 2019 came from D2D print, which is still in beta release right now, but 16.61% of print revenue came from there. The next highest is KDP print at 13.62%. And then Ingram, which was basically 1.17% of the income. And Ingram is where I started doing print on demand, so I'm still making bits of income there. And then another one, which was sort of an unexpected source, and it's almost traditional in the way the payment comes in. But this was a story I had initially released in 2004 that got picked up by an academic journal and is printed in a print journal that's being studied by high school students, and 4.43% of my print income came from that. So even though it is a little bit more traditional in nature in that I signed a contract and I get the royalties from an academic publisher, I still think of that because it's an independently published story. So I count that as indie. So let's take a look at Ebooks, which is probably the one that most people are interested in, because most listeners who are indie publishing, it's Ebooks. Okay, so the biggest percentage, the largest share of income from Ebooks for 2019 came from Story Bundle for me. 44.16% came from Story Bundle. Second is Kindle direct publishing. So Kindle sales, this would be ebook sales as well as, very, very small percentage of KENP reads. Now, that actually came to 44.15% of that came from Kindle. Next highest on the list was Kobo at 6.94%. Then Apple at 2.17%. Then Scribd at 0.81%. Nook at 0.62%. Overdrive at 0.47%, Bundle Rabbit at 0.38%, and Google at 0.31%. So when we're looking at the ebook distribution, I'm not only pleased that Kindle is not number one, is not more than 50% of my revenue, but less than 50% of my revenue, but I'm pretty pleased that I have Kobo, Apple, Scribd, Nook, Overdrive, Bundle Rabbit, Google. I have all of these different platforms that I'm earning income from my ebooks. And so that's really, really cool. But finally, let's take a look at audio. And here's the audio breakdown of my percentages. And I'm going to try and read these in the order from biggest to smallest. So for audio, the largest percent of my audio earnings this year in 2019 came from Bountiful. 30.81% of my audio earnings came from Bountiful, which is pretty exciting, pretty interesting. The next highest on the list was Authors Direct, which is a beta program from Findaway Voices. So obviously direct sales, you get to keep more of that. So 18.02% of my audio income came from being able to sell directly through Findaway Voices. Next highest on the list would be HiBooks, and HiBooks came in at 16.72% of my audio revenue. The next one on the list would be Biblioteca at 11.78%. And then Listen Up came in at 7.36%. Now, Listen Up does include a variety of different sources, but it was just too difficult to break that down with the way that they report to me. So I just counted them as a separate source. And that was the very first ebook that I had published and paid quite a bit of money for. So I haven't quite earned my money back on that one. So after Listen Up would be Hoopla at 6.15%. Then Audible at 4.19%, then Apple at 2.94%, and Scribd at 1.53%, and then finally Audio at Overdrive at 0.25%. So those are the breakdowns of my indie publishing sales for 2019. Again, I will, in a future episode, I'll probably share and talk about the percentages that I make from the various other sources, like the traditional publishing, as well as library sources and other things that aren't necessarily all indie, or some of it's mixed. But hopefully that gives you a perspective on some of the differences that can exist with making your products available in print, in audio, and an ebook, and how the different sources are coming in for those. And I love the diversity of that. I love the fact that, ebooks is, 80% of the income, but it's not all of it. And it means that, 20% of the income is coming from the other formats. And as I expand and grow those other formats, how does that help me earn more in my independent publishing success? Now, next year's probably going to be a little bit interesting, because I'm going to be doing a few more indie projects, a couple things that were previously only done traditionally. I'm going to see what happens when I migrate those over to indie, to see if that changes my indie income. Because most of my traditional publishing income comes from print sales, not from ebook sales. And again, I haven't done those calculations yet. So interesting to see that. I'm hoping this helps you if you're looking at your own 2019. Maybe you'll see some similarities. Maybe you'll see some variances. Maybe you'll see some platforms that you wonder, what is that? And how is he selling stuff there? But in any case, I thought that would be enlightening to share those details with you. Well, that's the end of episode 112 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. I hope that 2019 was a great year for you, and I hope that 2020 is a phenomenal year for you as well. Chances are very likely that episode 113 is going to be that wonderful panel discussion that we're recording on Monday, January 6th. With 4 amazing authors on productivity. That's probably going to be what's in episode 113 next week. But until next episode of next week, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.